There it is. Hello, BookTube. As you can see, we have a very special guest, a man who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyways. He has fans all around the world, including the American Feline Society, the Cormac McCarthy subreddit, and the Roman Catholic Church. Give it up for Steve Donoghue.
Hello, BookTube.
We're here today to continue the long-running, long-suffering Moby-Dick read-along with a person who has... Steve, you've read Moby-Dick once or twice. Oh, you have the Rockwell Kent. Man,
Yes, this is full of Rockwell Kent illustrations on almost every
wow.
page.
Real? I
But
had no idea there's so free.
there's Ahab. Uh, but it has been reissued,
Oh,
not
really?
by not by Modern Library, but I forget the name of the publisher. But somebody reissued it with all the illustrations.
Okay, great. I'm gonna
So
look out for it then, because I looked it up on like Amazon and used book thrift books, and they were running for $70, and I
yeah,
just looked up on the internet as many Rockwell Kent illustrations I could find.
this particular thing, this particular edition, you won't get this cover.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you'll get that Ahab illustration. That
Mm-hmm.
is the cover of the new
Oh,
reprint. So you
interesting.
won't get that, of course, but I've had this thing forever. So
Amazing. Yeah, that would be my go-to copy, I think, if I had it. Yeah, but I
this
like
is
this one.
one of, I think, 11 copies of Moby Dick that are in this little book room.
What is it about Moby Dick that lends itself to having irresistible editions? I don't know what it is.
I
Even
know.
before I read it,
Oh, I
I
know.
felt that.
I just at the end of last year, who was it that did it? Dover, the reprint company Dover, that makes such crappy looking paperbacks. They made a Moby Dick hardcover that's unbelievable.
Really
I
amazing. Yeah,
want
I
a
know
copy of it,
they
even
make
though I didn't. I had my hand on the buy button, and I thought,
yeah.
no, you don't even
With
have.
11 copies on the shelf, it's hard. Yeah, no, I always see the Dover paperbacks with that blue kind of bar arch, and
Yeah,
it just kind of feels like, middle school graphic design. But that's cool.
well,
I'll have to look that up.
they're there because they're cheap for schools. That,
That makes sense. Makes sense.
but they made a new hardcover Moby Dick that I actually want.
Yeah. So
You're
does
not going
does
to talk. The copy of Moby Dick that you fell in love with is not that paperback that you're holding up.
right? It was a Chiltern edition that was made of that kind of plasticky, not paper things that is so heavy that I backpacked and biked through Japan with, which was
Children
like
editions are
hugging a brick. I
they
do
are.
really like them. Yeah, so if you have 11 copies of Moby Dick, does that mean you've read Moby Dick 11 times? Could you have read a book that many times, Steve?
Yes,
Or I won't assume. I won't assume.
I did. I did read Moby Dick 11 times in the late 1950s. The number has gone up since then
Yeah.
considerably. You know perfectly well, though. The one person I don't have to feel squirm about when they mention this. You know perfectly well that sometimes, no matter what, nothing will really hit the spot except Moby Dick.
I mentioned that in the last episode. I read a section of the writing. I should find the chapter, and I just said, I don't think I've ever read writing that makes me feel like this, that does this to me. And it's, a lot of people talk about prose poems. Do you think Moby Dick is a prose poem, or do you think that's just kind of a label that is fancy but doesn't really work?
I never understood what it means.
So my understanding is just that
A
it's
prose
like,
poem is like a cow person.
right, exactly.
What is a cow human? I have
But
no
I
idea.
think I think it's sort of that because Moby Dick throughout will enter these stretches of internal rhyme schemes and these alliterative passages that are just gushing out of him, that it's like poetry, but at the same time,
Is it that?
right.
I often
Well,
think
I
in
don't know.
my
Maybe it is.
crankier moments, I'm not usually cranky, but in my crankier moments, I often think that people invented the term prose poetry to give prose, to get prose off the hook.
Ah, I see. I
Doesn't
see.
prose poetry mostly boil down to, boy, it's just beautiful?
Yeah,
All
probably.
prose should be
Probably.
beautiful. Otherwise it's just
Maybe it's that Melville is so I mean, I think one of the things that you have said before is that it doesn't take much for your visual imagination to be stimulated. But I think Melville really stimulates most people's visual imaginations very easily in the way that great poetry can. And maybe that's why it has that association. But before we get lost in the sea of Moby Dick criticism, the topic of today's video is specifically chapters 31 through 40. So I figured before we jump in, I'll just read them off in case any of y'all are reading at home. We got chapter 31, Queen Mab, Cetology, best chapter, the Speksunder, a Dutch word, the cabin table, the masthead, the quarterdeck, Ahab and all, sunset, dusk, first night watch, and forecastle midnight. And I thought this is a good sampling to have you on to talk about this because we get the whaling chapters, but we also start kind of getting into the Shakespearean Melville.
There is no uh, other stretch of chapters in this book that you could have chosen to perfectly illustrate the way this book can change. You
I mean,
said prose poetry. Well, if this is prose poetry, what are we supposed to do with cetology? What are we supposed to do with that chapter?
parody writing. I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know where to go with it. And I love that, so Queen Mab starts with, I think, Flask or Stubb talking about the dream he had of getting kicked by Ahab. And then you launch into cetology after that. Steve's read this book many times. You've also taught this book many times. And you've semi-taught it on BookTube. And I've watched all your videos on Moby-Dick. I've watched every booktuber's video on Moby-Dick I can find. And I know one of the things you like to say about the whaling chapters is that they function as a sort of tri-works, where Melville's intention was to make Moby-Dick the book function like a whaling ship, and that everything you need to know about whaling is included within Moby-Dick so that it can be a self-sufficient experience in the same way that a whaling ship is a self-sufficient vessel.
Yeah.
Is that normally how you teach it to your students when you get to the whaling chapters? Or
Well, I usually don't teach the whaling chapter.
I was gonna ask you, do you just cross them out?
I'm not trying to create the next Ted Kaczynski. I don't. So usually I leave.
I'm a lost cause on that. I'm too far gone.
You are. Yes, you are. Uh, and none of us would be surprised if you climbed a bell tower and started picking off students, except, oh wait, the stairs would be hard on your knees.
Oh, I mean, you know me and my knees. It's too much workout.
Maybe you could just hang out in the lobby.
God. Well, I'm gonna shut this down right now because no joking about this.
Of being old.
It's tough. Oh yeah. I mean, if only I had someone to relate to about this. But all I ever have is 28-year-old friends. Tough, tough.
Hate me because I'm beautiful.
Yeah, right.
The the uh the reason that I teach it that way, or taught it that way a long, long time ago, is because that's what separates it from a lot of other grand works of literature.
Mm.
I mean, Melville says in the chapters that we're talking about today, he says that this is the longest voyage that anyone ever makes, or that anyone ever has made, where you leave your port and you might not be back home for 5 years.
That's astounding. I mean, for the 1800s too. I mean, imagine the salted beef and bread must get kind of stale after the first 2 years.
Yeah, you are a factory afloat. You are a
It's
world
amazing.
contained within yourself. And if you
Mhm.
think about it, no disrespect, but that is certainly not true of the Iliad.
Mm.
It's not even true of
Right.
War and
You have
even
to have some kind of context to know. If you don't know about the cycle or the story of the Trojan War, the narrative structure won't make sense of the Iliad because where's the Trojan horse? Where's the ending? Where's the beginning? The Odyssey's a little bit more self-sufficient, but yeah, I mean,
and
most books don't work like Moby Dick.
with
And the
War
fact
and
that I
Peace.
read it in the children edition with no notes, services, I mean, it just shows that this book can be read without anything.
It has to be. It can be because Melville includes it all.
Hmm.
Whereas Tolstoy never explains who Bonaparte is.
So when you
He
read
never
Moby Dick,
explains what's going on. He doesn't
right?
explain what a cannon is,
Wow,
what a
that
regiment
really
is.
that really puts you into the perspective of every single thing about this. The monkey rope,
There's
I mean, every
nothing in
little
the monkey
detail.
rope. Exactly.
Um,
There's nothing in Moby Dick that is not
it's
explained.
amazing. Never thought about that. So when
Nevertheless, it's deadly.
I was gonna ask you,
I know you're the wrong person to tell that to, but cetology is a deadly chapter.
no, I understand that. So okay, before we get into the downsides, my one upside, I'm just gonna give it the full argument that I can. The reason I think the whaling chapters work not only in the sense that they, like we've said, give you the kind of try works of the book, I think they also work because they give you the feeling that long time at sea gives you of having the time to think and ponder. And when you, especially early on in this set of chapters, we get the masthead, we get Ishmael talking about how, the melancholy, ponderous dreamers stand on that masthead and they never see a whale, but they're able to think and lose themselves. And I think all the chapters on whaling make you feel like you're on the boat with him, and that when you return to the plot, it feels like time has elapsed. Whereas I think if you were to skip from plot to plot chapter, you lose a little bit of that. Maybe. That's my argument. I don't know
Oh,
what your thoughts are, but
you are head over heels in love with this
I
book.
can't help it. I can't help it.
I
It
got to
just,
tell you, it's heartwarming to see.
I'm glad, yeah. Okay, so I saw that it made like the classical literature subreddit's top book of 2025. I think it's
No
having a
way.
resurgence, which is cool. I
Eh,
think people want an experience. I think people are tired of being entertained by 90-second snippets their whole lives until they can't focus on anything. And people have started picking up, the Count of Monte Cristo and just reading it because they want to feel this deep thing. And I think Moby Dick does that.
yeah, I would. I'm wondering if Reddit is reacting to the fact that it's a story about a closed a society that is the helpless plaything of a madman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Unfortunate. Maybe it's too close to home. Yeah. No wonder they would love that. But I think the second one was the Iliad. So
Oh,
you
okay.
never
All
know.
right.
Maybe they're safe. Yeah.
But in the chapters that we're looking at today, you have the pinnacle of uh what you're going to cringe at the word, but info dumping.
Mhm. No,
You
not at all.
you have cetology, but you also have the quarterdeck,
Hmm.
which is Melville at the peak of his power.
It's amazing. It's amazing how you and I and everyone reading it falls under Ahab's spell and the demagoguery of it.
Almost, almost everyone.
Starbuck, I know.
Melville knows that he has to have someone
Mm,
rejects the madness.
mhm,
Those of you who are listening in the chapter of the quarterdeck, Ahab is on the deck of the ship when a crew member calls out and says, "Is it true that Moby Dick is the one who bit off your leg?"
mhm,
And spurred on by that, Ahab at first says, "Oh, is it Starbuck who told you that?" But then he goes on and says, "Yes, it was Moby Dick who dismasted me. It was Moby Dick that maimed me. And I intend to chase him." This is the famous speech that was parodied in Star Trek II, where I will chase him round perdition's flame until I give him up.
mhm.
But when Melville, when I'm sorry, I keep conflating the two. When Ahab
Yep.
says that, he's revealing to his men something that they did not know before that moment,
Mhm.
which is that they are not hunting whales.
Right.
They are on a private
One whale.
vengeance.
And which, of
One
course,
whale.
Starbucks strongly objects to. He says, "How much will your vengeance get you in the Nantucket market?"
Right,
And
exactly. How much will thy vengeance fetch thee? He wants to know. I came here to hunt whales, not to hunt my commander's vengeance.
yeah,
And
it's
it doesn't
beautiful.
matter. He is one voice among your what you said happens in this chapter. The crew entirely falls under Ahab's quasi supernatural sway.
Hmm.
So that when he nails a doubloon to the mast, that in addition to whatever portion of the proceeds you get from this voyage, you also get that if you spot the white whale.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. It's perfect. It's a perfect incentivizing thing. And one of the things that Nathaniel Philbrick talked about in Why Read Moby Dick was the idea that he does all the little demagogue tricks. He asks them at the beginning. He starts out with these questions that have obvious answers. What do you do when you see a whale? Sing out for him. Good, like children. And he
Right,
and
he
he
builds them up.
he
Right,
builds them
builds
up
them up.
until he finally gets asked that question, and then it pours forth. And we're getting these chapters with stage directions. We're getting them intra
Some of the
Ahab.
chapters.
We're getting, and then of course we get the whole scene with everyone, all the different sailors.
Yes, at the end, and that starts to take shape when Starbuck confronts Ahab
Mm,
privately,
hmm. Hmm.
and we
And
get
there's an
that
aside.
amazing scene. That amazing. It's the closest that Ahab ever comes to explaining his mania to
Mhm.
anyone. Where
Yeah,
he says, "I will
spark the
strike the
little the
sun."
lower layers. Yeah, all things are but pasteboard masks, and then ending in that line. So I was on the airport on the way to Japan reading that, and I got to the line, and if there's anyone watching this if there's anyone watching this at all, first of all, crazy. But if there's anyone watching this who isn't reading along and just wants to hang out, I would highly recommend going and reading the quarterdeck, specifically this monologue by Ahab, because me saying the words out loud cannot
Oh,
convey the spell that he casts. But I'll say it anyways now. When he says, "Talk not of blasphemy to me, man, I'd strike the sun if it insulted me," I like jolted out of my seat in the airport, and I was like, I've never heard someone talk like this. It's
yeah,
amazing. So
yeah,
cool.
and it's so key that it's in response to Starbucks saying that taking vengeance on a dumb brute animal smacks of blasphemy.
Hmm. Yeah.
And in a normal person, in a normal setting, in a normal whaling vessel, the mere mention of blasphemy would bring the captain to heel. He would suddenly be circumspect. That's when Starbuck realizes this guy is completely, elementally insane.
Hmm.
He's not only not afraid of blasphemy, he advocates it.
Yeah. Wow.
And another point that we might want to make for listeners, if there's anybody out there who has never read Moby Dick because it's been sitting up on that shelf and it looks really dusty and musty, does it sound like we're describing a dusty and musty book?
I mean,
No,
that's just
it
it.
is
Yeah.
not.
It's completely electric. It's humming with energy when you read it. It's amazing, which is funny. I mean, that's I'm preaching to the choir here, and maybe actually you were the preacher who made me into a choir member. But the classics are not dusty old things. They were mostly made to be entertaining, and maybe the only reason they're difficult is because you have to learn a little about the language, a little about the time period and whatever. But they weren't meant to be tough, you know. And
No,
Moby Dick,
no.
I don't know
Although
what how Melville meant by Moby Dick actually, but he certainly wasn't
Moby
trying to.
Dick, everybody at the time found it odd. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not tough, but they wondered what was going on. They
Well, poor
wondered what the
Nathaniel
hell was going on.
Hawthorne, you know, having this. Yeah, who knows?
And
Uh,
Nathaniel Hawthorne never wrote anything that his major novels brush against convention. There's an amazing mad sequence at the climax of the Marble Faun. There's an unspoken in the House of the Seven Gables. You are expecting a moral rebuke that never comes.
mm,
Same thing in the Scarlet Letter. You're expecting a moral rebuke that never actually happens,
mm,
which leaves you up in the air when the book is over. Well, what was that then?
right.
But it's not this.
Yeah.
It's not I'd strike the sun.
Yeah.
It's not that.
It's just kind
And everything else about it, I mean, that doubloon that is nailed to the masthead, of course, would be useless.
of.
If
Yeah.
you pried it off and brought it to market, that's a huge hole in the middle of
Right.
it.
Right. That's crazy. Yeah.
The
It's
men don't care. They don't care. They're caught up in his dream.
hmm which is so cool, and I love too that in the midst of the clamor and all of this that's happening, you lose Ishmael. At a certain point in all of this, the reader, God, Melville is so good. We forget that it's supposed to be a first-person narration, and suddenly we're getting Ahab's monologue in his cabin by himself, and then Stubb monologuing, and then this scene, and then we bring it back, and it's almost comical when he says this. Um, it's what chapter is it exactly? It's 41. It's a Moby Dick. This is for next time's reading. But he says, "I, Ishmael, was one of that crew." He has to kind of remind you who's telling the story here because we're starting to lose Ishmael, and it's
Yeah.
kind of
A
like,
little
yeah,
anticlimactic because the next chapter, the one we're not talking about, is the one actually called Moby
Moby
Dick.
Dick. I know. It's a big teaser, cliffhanger for the next installment.
Yeah,
Um,
we don't want to give away how Moby Dick ends.
yeah, you never know who's watching this. It may end at a big dance party like Shrek too. You just never know. The thing that's funny about Ishmael's narration, I think I saw an infograph actually of the amount of times the word "I" occurs in Moby Dick. And I don't know if I'm getting reversed, but like if this is the start of the book and it goes on here, it just starts to vanish.
Yeah, well, there's a bigger story to tell.
And then of course the chase scenes, not at all, and then the epilogue.
We
That's how
see lots of scenes even in these chapters here today that uh Ishmael could not possibly have seen.
yeah.
We get inside the heads of crew members that he can't possibly know those thoughts,
So
and
why
also the mob's dream at the beginning.
right? Why is it that it works though? Why is it when another like teen dystopian book that's supposed to have first person narration, then that narrator somehow knows something they're not supposed to know? Why does that bug me when this doesn't bug me at all?
Well, it could have something to do with literary talent. There's
No, no way.
when the something of something and something author changes narrative or loses the main focus narrator for 4 chapters in a row, your first and only thought is this is only happening because you don't have any control over what you're doing.
Right.
whereas you never think that in Moby Dick.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes I do feel that Melville is out of control, but not in the literary way, just in the way of sanity. He's just kind of going on and on and on. But I think it's. I definitely agree with you though that there's, and I definitely made this discovery in my art making life of making music is that there really are no rules that you can't break, in the sense that it's not about the rule. It's about, is this working? Is this just working well? And anything can work well. 16 pages, no paragraph break can work well if it's done well, which is
Yeah.
amazing. And
Or
it's
and be Schadenfreude if it doesn't work well.
or be sorry, be what?
It can be Schadenfreude.
I don't know that word.
Novel. Yeah, it's a novel. Good for
Oh,
you that you've never heard of
yeah,
it.
good. Okay, well, I'll stay there. I'll stay in my blissful ignorance with that. Yeah, I don't know. Moby Dick does a lot of things that I think, and maybe it's one of the reasons why it does have people alongside the whaling chapters being, like you said, deadly. Um, It's not, people reading this for the first time who don't know what to expect, it can be maybe off-putting. And I feel that it's definitely this way with songs. When you almost kind of have to catch a wavelength, like catching a wave, and if you miss it, it's just happening and you're not on it. And it seems like sometimes we love things irrationally and we hate things irrationally. We sort of, if something is got us going on the wavelength, everything it does seems to have that magic. But if I just didn't get into this book, I think it could be a torturous experience, which makes sense. And also, if you're being forced to read it, that makes sense. But yeah.
Yes, when I would teach this thing, I would leave out cetology. I would tell my students, this is what it is.
Yeah.
Melville is describing these animals that these men are hunting, and he's going into detail and whatnot, and he's doing it for a couple of artistic reasons. He wants to tell you everything that you would have known when he was publishing this book about whales, which you wouldn't have known unless he tells you. And also, he wants to use those chapters as ballast against stuff like the quarterdeck or the Dream of Mab. He wants to balance those things out. And at this early point in the book, he is still doing that balance quasi humorously.
Mhm.
It's still a tiny bit of tongue in cheek when he's ladling out all these factual stuff. That gets burned away as the book goes on.
I think the end of Cetology is like this pretty funny line.
Yes, he tries
It's
really
yeah,
hard to bring it back
right,
from
and it works for me. He says, "God keep me from ever completing anything," in reference to the fact that his Cetology, his whole system is not complete. He says, "This whole book is but a draught, nay, but the draught of a draught. Oh, time, strength, cash, and patience." Which is great. Like at the end of the Cetology chapter saying, "Oh, I'm writing this book for money." Poor Melville. He had no idea what was coming to him.
My mistake was that sometimes I did include our first chapter this time around. I
Mm,
say you should read that. Don't read Cetology, but read that The Dream of Mob,
mm.
and then we'll move on from there. And that was a mistake. That
Really?
is Melville at his most
Kind of
mystical.
farcical. Oh, mystical.
I I I'm always reminded of one time where a student read that chapter and actually asked in class, uh, I had a weird reaction to it, and I'm wondering if that means I'm gay
Whoa! Well,
because of the
just
imagery.
wait for I squeezed and squeezed that sperm until I could squeeze no more. Young stripling, you're gonna have a lot more questions about your identity then. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Melville. I think you said once that he doesn't quite fit into perfectly into the square peg of his sexuality or something like that. And I don't know. This book, you can interpret it in many ways, but that's a fair interpretation.
Well, the point of chapters like Cetology is to tamp down the passion. It's in these chapters that we're talking about now that the full extent of that passion is revealed.
Hmm.
That Ahab is not only insane and obsessed, but almost elemental.
Hmm.
He's almost not human.
Hmm.
And we don't quite know that about him
Hmm.
or about what the point of this voyage is until the quarterdeck. That's
Hmm.
when all of that gets revealed. And Starbuck, who is, salt of the earth, pragmatic New Englander,
Hmm.
is piously horrified.
Yeah. And
This is
wow.
what we're doing, and he can't. When you're out at sea, the captain is God. It's not like you can say otherwise.
Mhm.
Especially since by the end of the chapter of the quarterdeck, even if it ever crossed his mind, Starbuck knows he could not effect a mutiny. The whole crew is behind Ahab.
Yeah. I mean, and there is a heartbreaking chapter to come where Starbuck does contemplate the extremes of his situation and I mean, an amazing interior monologue.
Yeah, he all but knows he's doomed.
Which is and he thinks of his child and he thinks of Ahab and his I think Ahab's wife recently had a child and he said
Yeah, Ahab's little child.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
and Melville never loses the tenderness and the reality of these men being on a financial expedition and who want to return home and make money for their families and for the widows at home who own 1/777th or whatever it is of the ship and the nail and whatever. That is repeated enough times throughout to not get lost in all this passion that we're talking about. Melville, I
right.
think, does a good
Until
job of
until
doing
the ballast chapters stop.
it. Right,
The
right.
passion just completely takes over.
Hmm.
But
If I
but
remember
for a
correctly,
while we get the real world intruding. We get the townhouse story. We get the
yeah,
Rachel. We get other ships that
yeah,
we our glimpses on the wide open ocean that other people exist.
yeah. Which is amazing. I don't think we have had a single gam yet, now that I come to think of it. And that's one of the most
Not at this point.
pleasurable parts of the whole story. And it also speaks to Melville not being structureless. Every single gam is an encounter closer with Moby Dick. And oh, the Moby Dick, never heard of her. And then, two gams later, oh, we heard a story about her, I'll tell you what we heard. And three gams later, a crew member was lost and tugged into the infinite blue or whatever. And then until we get to the Rachel, of course. And
What we mean by GAM, for those of you who are listening, since we're geeking out on
yeah,
Moby Dick,
books,
is
books.
the festivities that happen when two ships meet and their crews intermingle.
Yeah.
Think of it like wine and calzones at Hyde Cottage.
Exactly, on the open ocean. Yeah, it's funny, and the reason we know that is because Melville gives us a dictionary definition over and over again. So I want to ask you, when you read this book, do you tend to dip in and out of it like the Bible? I know some people treat Moby Dick kind of like that. They open to a section. Or do you consistently give it a full read through? And when you do you skip cetology? Do you skip the whaling chapters?
When I do a full read through, which is about every year, I don't skip anything.
Yeah.
No, because I think that the cetology chapters, that the exposition dump chapters are beautiful.
Hmm.
I know that's an impossible sell unless you're under the spell of the book. That's an impossible sell. But I think they're beautiful, so I
And
don't skip it.
I think that speaks though to the to your teaching method being a good one. Just that I think if you read those plot chapters, you would fall under the spell and want to read the cetology chapters and experience the whole thing. I can't imagine reading just the plot chapters and not being curious what the rest of it could be.
Right. Right. Well, there's a certain point at which you just love Melville's voice on the
Yeah.
page.
Yep.
I believe that point is the quarterdeck, the chapter of the quarterdeck. I think after that chapter, you are either totally bought in or you can't be bought in by this book.
I
And
think so
once
too.
you're totally bought in, you'll read anything. I've known many readers, first time and second time readers of this book, to get to the chapter of the quarterdeck and just go back and read the whole thing, reading the chapters that they skipped.
That's so cool. That makes sense. I wonder. Yeah,
It's
that's
a
a
really it's a dramatic reveal. It's we're a third of the way through. Melville
right.
has the crew realize what is happening here.
Mhm. And it's a common strategy that I think Melville, I don't think I've ever seen it employed better, where the villain, and especially when it's a famous villain, everyone knows Call Me Ishmael, everyone knows Captain Ahab, everyone knows White Whale. You start to read this book and you get all these fun chapters, these buddy chapters with Queequeg, but there's no Ahab in sight. And when you start the book, you're not on the open ocean. You're not even close. You're in the middle of Manhattan until he has to go to New Bedford and then whatever. And I think Ahab coming so late into the book like that does give it some sort of dramatic reveal, some sort of presence. I think a lot of famous villains have that, but nowhere is it better than Ahab, who slowly crawls in and out of his cabin until he's just like a pillar of the quarterdeck, standing there in the wind all day, every day, pacing. And we start to get these cracks, these flashes like thunder, like lightning, really, until I think it's Stubby says to Flask, the chicks that's in him pecks the shell, and he can tell that this thing is coming. And then the thunderclap breaks loose, and we get the quarterdeck.
Tiny little hints. Everybody at the beginning of the book is protesting a bit too much. The speech or the sermon about Jonah and the whale it's large and rollicking and it's rhetorically beautiful, but it's pretty foreboding. It's a speech about someone being swallowed by a whale. And also Peleg and Bildad, when they are trying to reassure Ishmael about Captain Ahab, saying Ahab did not name himself.
Yeah,
It sounds like when you go back and read those things in the full knowledge of the book, you realize that they're trying to calm fears that they know are justified.
they're trying to cover up, and you get these sentences like they talk about his wife and his child, and he says Ahab has his humanities. And the
Yeah,
fact that you would
you don't
even
like
say,
someone needing to say that,
like,
right?
wait a minute. This is starting to be a bit of a red flag, this guy, which is crazy. And also, of course, they know he's still sort of mad, but they think that the fresh air will do him good. So Peleg and Bildad send him out on this adventure, not really knowing what they're doing, but knowing something is terribly wrong. Just pretty funny.
And in the quarterdeck, we realize what's wrong. In the quarterdeck, the crew realizes that they are under the control of an obsessive madman. who has their destinies in his hand. And I often wonder, is that what BookTube felt like when I started my channel? All of a
Wow.
sudden,
Wow. And here we get, and this is really the metaphor that Melville was going for all the whole time is that Ahab is Steve, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. I would just go and admit that. I think, yeah, I don't know. I think Starbuck is as a character. I think he does a good. Melville does a good job of making sure that Starbuck has this kind of reason. He's well introduced when Melville characterizes him as a person who natural terrors like whales and whatever. He's courageous, and courage is for him like some sort of resource. But he can't stand up to Ahab. He needs to kind of have that sort of flaw in order to be this thing that Ahab can crush. Otherwise, yeah, like you said, we need someone who can be crushed. But I don't know. I don't really quite
I'm
remember.
curious to know when you were first reading this book in your children edition, and you got to the later chapters that we're dealing with today, where suddenly we have stage directions
Yeah,
and speaking parts and whatnot in the middle of a novel.
yeah.
What did you think the first time you read that?
I
Were
was
you
I was
probably bought
really
in by then?
confused. No, I was already bought in. So funny enough, timeline wise, I already mentioned I was in the airport waiting to get on my plane to go to Japan when I read the quarterdeck, and I remember being on the plane and reading the stage chapters, and I remember thinking then like I wonder if Melville was into Shakespeare. And now, having kind of read about the book, Melville, who is losing his eyesight and wrote much of Moby-Dick in a green crayon, which is so sad almost in a way. He had bought all of these large typeface volumes of the complete Shakespeare, and by the time he was getting into King Lear, he was writing about Pip and Ahab, and he was writing about all these characters. Um, I was already in the spell, and I think by the time I got to Sunset, which is a chapter that is in first person from Ahab's perspective, I started to realize that this book was starting to mutate as it went along. That what had begun as this thing, I thought Moby Dick was going to be more like what Type was, which is this kind of adventure. I started to realize about at the time that we were getting to these stage chapters that not only is the story just going to be crazy, but the structure itself is going to be pretty experimental, which is
The
cool.
whole reading world realized it right about then. Right
I
about then.
bet.
The
I
reading
wonder how
world
many
realized,
people get.
oh wait, this isn't Type.
This is
Oh,
not Type B or it's not Omu. I wonder also, like you said, I think once you read the quarter deck, you're probably on board. But if you're not, I bet those chapters will probably make a lot of people stop reading. In fact, I've heard a lot of people say they stop around 200 pages.
at this point, for you make your notes about Moby Dick in bright crayon, right? In green crayon.
Right, when I can use my arms and I don't have to dictate to voice to text. I know. Yeah, poor little me.
Terrible shame. You'll never go to sea again.
Oh no. So I was actually thinking about that. I books to me seem to have a relationship to the seasons, or at least they can. You can read anything at any time if it's a good enough book. But Dracula in the autumn seems like a really nice pairing, or whatever it is. And I was thinking about Moby Dick, and I was thinking there's not really a season for Moby Dick other than being on the sea. I feel like being on the sea and reading Moby Dick must be just a chief
But
delight.
you have never been on the sea,
I have,
right?
but not in like a trans-Pacific transatlantic voyage. I've been on the open ocean in like a deep sea fishing vessel once, and had that feeling of not being able to see land, that electric feeling that he describes in the book, which is nice that I'd experienced that. But no, I've never been on it like now I want to be on it after reading this book.
But not for this reason, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, I would like to go on a nice, pleasant, cruise.
Well,
Not
have you
really.
ever been on a whale watch?
No, I've not. I
Oh,
don't know if I'd really want to now. I know that whale watching, I've heard that one of the ways that people stimulate whales to breach is by like making whale noises and emulating whale songs,
oh,
and that can really interfere with
well,
them. I don't know. I've heard,
seedy, disreputable whale watchers might do that. I mean, I'm talking about something out of an aquarium
oh,
or
I
something
don't
like
know.
that, where
I
they're not doing anything like that. They're
Yeah.
just going to where the whales are and hoping to see them.
Yeah, no, I would be very interested in seeing that. In fact, I would like to look up more videos about whales and understand them because, yeah, that's this book. This book was one of the books that actually I think planted seeds for me to end up stop like eating animal products and stop doing those things. And I now have I want to experience more empathy for these whales because Melville is all over the place in his relationship to whales. We get really tender scenes. We get family scenes of nursing and sex and life and death and all these things of whale societies and cultures. And then we get chapters like The Advocate, and it's just kind of it's a lot to balance. Um, but
Not that our listeners know anything about what we're talking about.
yeah,
Just
that's true.
reaching out about
You never know. You
reaching out
never know.
about what we do.
Speaking of our listeners, we only have about 1 minute and 40 seconds left. So before we go, I'd like to plug that Steve and I are about to have one last little chat, segue very conveniently from the topic of whaling to the topic of Japan, which will be happening on his channel. He's a small little booktube channel. He could use all the help he can get. And so go over and check out Steve's channel if you have the time and the inclination.
And read Moby Dick.
And read Moby Dick.
That should
Yeah,
be our parting
yeah. Do you
message.
have any final words? If you had to sell this book, elevator pitch to a person who's heard of Moby Dick, what do you like to say to them?
It's not what you think.
Yeah,
You look at it and you see a big, dusty 19th century book, a book that has a reputation as being long and complicated, right? When you talk about a long book, people will say, oh, well, it's not like it's Moby Dick.
yeah. Which is
You
funny
don't
because
mean,
Moby Dick's not even that long. It's not.
no, people don't mean page length when they say that. They mean impenetrability.
Mm,
That isn't true. That isn't true.
not
Obviously,
true.
from this conversation, you could tell it's not
We love
true.
it, and
It's
there are
wow.
there's more than just the two of us to love this book. So go out and read Moby Dick, everybody. Well, thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you hopefully very soon. Bye bye, everyone.